Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material.
I'm genuinely looking forward to this one because the material we're covering today is, well, it's honestly some of the most psychologically penetrating text ever put to paper.
It really is. And I mean, for you listening, I just want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine holding absolute unchecked power over the known human world.
Right, just total control.
Exactly. You command legions. Your face is minted on the actual currency people use. If you want a city leveled, it burns.
Yeah.
And if you want a palace built, stones move. You basically have access to every luxury, every pleasure, every indulgence the human mind could possibly conjure up.
The absolute peak of status.
Right. Yet, in the quiet, desperate hours of the morning, in a private diary that, no one was ever supposed to read, you were practically begging yourself just to get out of bed.
Yeah. It's just a profound contradiction, isn't it? I mean, it completely shatters the image we usually have of historical absolute rulers.
Completely. And that's why we're doing this deep dive today. We're looking at books 5 and 6 of the Meditations, written by a man who had the entire world at his fingertips, yet he felt entirely crushed by its weight at times.
Yeah, and our mission here is to act as your guides through this text, for the listener. We want to extract the practical, life-altering wisdom hidden in these private entries.
Because it really is a survival guide.
Yeah, it totally is. When the author talks about the court in Book 6, Section 10, or when he observes the public bawling at the courts in Book 5, Section 29, he isn't speaking theoretically.
Right, he's living it.
Exactly. He is actively trying not to lose his mind, surrounded by sycophants, mechanics, actors, and just the endless, grueling bureaucracy of Rome.
We really have to keep that human context at the forefront. I mean, he explicitly mentions the pressure of being Antoninus and a citizen of Rome in Book 6, Section 39.
Yeah, he was managing massive border wars, a devastating plague, and the constant threat of betrayal. It's wild.
So the text we're analyzing isn't, some polished essay written for public consumption or like philosophical clout.
Not at all. It's a toolkit for emotional survival. It's this raw, unfiltered internal monologue of a human being wrestling with his own exhaustion, right? His frustrations with other people and his profound fear of losing his moral center in this chaotic world.
Which makes the very first entry of Book 5 so striking to me, because it starts exactly where the daily struggle begins for so many of us listening right now.
The war against the alarm clock.
The desperate desire to stay under the warm covers.
It is deeply reassuring, honestly, that even an absolute ruler had to argue with himself just to face the morning.
Right.
In Book 5, Section 1, he documents this internal debate perfectly. He writes down the exact voice of his own resistance. He says, oh, but this is pleasing.
He literally just wants to stay in the warm bed.
Yeah. He wants the physical comfort of sleep. And he forces himself to counter that voice by saying, I am stirred up to go about a man's work.
But he doesn't just yell at himself to toughen up, which is kind of what you might expect from a Roman leader.
No, he doesn't.
He actually builds this massive cosmic argument just to get his feet on the floor. Like he tells himself to look at the plants, the sparrows, the ants, the spiders, and the bees.
Which is such a specific list, right? But he's tapping into a fundamental concept of his worldview here, which is teleology.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
So teleology is the idea that everything in the universe has a specific ordained purpose. When he looks at a spider spinning a web or a bee gathering pollen, he observes that they are orderly performing their roles.
They aren't having an existential crisis about being a bee.
Exactly. They aren't questioning their existence. They are doing whatsoever naturally belongs to them to preserve the harmony of the universe. So he turns that lens inward.
And he asks himself this really piercing question, doesn't he?
Yeah, he says, why should a human being be the only creature exempt from doing what their nature requires?
Okay, I have to pause you there, because my modern brain is immediately throwing up red flags.
Oh, I bet. It's a tough pill to swallow.
Right, because if I'm listening to this on my morning commute and I am legitimately exhausted, I mean, maybe I'm working 2 jobs, maybe I'm dealing with a newborn, or maybe my job just feels incredibly pointless.
Yeah, that's a really common reality.
So this advice could sound incredibly tone-deaf. Like, is this just an ancient Roman version of toxic hustle culture? Is he basically saying, grind until you die, the universe demands productivity?
That is the exact trap a modern reader falls into right there. And it requires a complete translation of what he actually means by nature and work.
because he doesn't mean office work.
No, not at all. When he tells himself to go do a man's work, he is not advocating for capitalist output. He isn't talking about maximizing shareholder value or achieving inbox zero. He is talking about existential purpose. In this philosophical framework, the fundamental nature of a human being is not economic productivity, it's sociability.
Sociability, like being friendly.
More profound than that, it's the capacity for reason and the duty to contribute to the common good of human society.
Ah, okay. So staying in bed isn't just a matter of being physically lazy.
Exactly. Staying in bed out of pure pleasure-seeking is a denial of our fundamental interconnectedness. He argues that if you truly loved yourself, you would love your nature.
And if you loved your nature, you wouldn't hide from your role in the human community.
Spot on. And he drives this point home by comparing our reluctance to the passion of artists and workers. He notes that a dedicated mechanic, a dancer, or even a vain person obsessed with public applause, they'll gladly skip sleep and food to perfect their craft.
Right. They will, as he says, pine themselves at their works.
Yeah. So he's essentially shaming himself by asking, do you value the common good of humanity less than a dancer values their art?
Man, that cuts deep. I mean, he acknowledges that we need a certain amount of rest, eating, and drinking, obviously.
Sure, he's not anti-sleep.
But he accuses himself of going beyond that which would suffice when it comes to comfort, while falling criminally short of his potential in matters of action.
And for you listening today, this requires a radical reframing of the morning routine. When you're staring at the ceiling, dreading the day, you aren't just facing a commute or a tedious meeting.
You are facing your fundamental duty to the human community.
Yes. You are the bee, the ant, the spider. You're meant to weave your specific thread into the fabric that keeps the world orderly.
So your work might be raising a child with patience, or supporting a coworker who is struggling.
Or simply bringing a rational, calm presence to a really chaotic environment. That is the man's work he is desperate to wake up for.
Yeah, okay, so let's say we've wrestled ourselves out of the warm bed. We've embraced our inner bee, and we are out in the world ready to do some good for the human community.
Great step one.
But almost immediately, we run into a massive ego trap. How should we actually approach doing these good deeds?
This is where it gets really challenging.
Yeah, because in Book 5, Section 6, he dissects the psychology of altruism, and it is a brilliant, entirely ruthless observation of human behavior.
Oh, it really is.
He lays out 3 distinct types of people when it comes to doing a favor.
It's a masterpiece of psychological profiling, honestly. He starts with the first type. Those who, the moment they do you a favor, are ready to set them on the score for it and to require retaliation.
Setting them on the score. So in our modern vocabulary, this is the purely transactional relationship.
Exactly. They bought you coffee on Tuesday, so they expect you to buy it on Wednesday. And if you don't, there is immediate friction. It is just a mathematical equation of favors.
We all know that person. But the second type is where it gets much more uncomfortable, because this is where, most of us probably live.
Yeah, this one stings a bit. The second type of person doesn't actively demand a return favor. They don't hand you an invoice for their kindness, right?
Yes.
But internally, they secretly view you as their debtor. They keep a meticulous mental ledger.
Oh, the mental ledger.
They hold on to the memory of the sacrifice they made for you, and that memory colors the power dynamic of the relationship from that point forward.
You see this constantly in relationships and families. You might not demand a favor back, but the moment that person slights you or annoys you, your immediate internal monologue is, after all I did for them.
After I helped them move.
Exactly. After I stayed late to cover their shift. The good deed becomes this weapon you keep holstered just in case.
Which leads directly to the third type, right? The ideal state the author is striving for.
Who are they?
These are the people who, when they have done a good deed, do not so much as know what they have done.
They don't even know. He compares this ideal person to a vine bearing grapes.
I love this analogy.
When the vine has borne its proper fruit, it is completely contented and seeks no further recompense. He also uses the analogy of a horse after a race, or a hunting dog after it has caught the prey.
They just do what they are designed to do.
Right, the vine doesn't look around the vineyard waiting for the other plants to applaud its grapes. It just drops the fruit and prepares for the next season.
And notice how perfectly this ties back to his argument for getting out of bed in the first place. Why does the vine grow grapes?
Because it's the nature of a vine to do so.
Exactly. Why does a human do a good deed? Because they are human, and human nature is fundamentally sociable. If you view a good deed as a transaction, you are treating your own nature as a commodity.
So the true reward for doing good is simply the fact that you fulfilled your purpose.
Precisely.
Right.
But I have to push back here because my modern sensibilities are screaming right now.
Yeah, I figured they might.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
If I am trying to build a healthy community or a strong marriage or a good corporate culture, I want people to be aware of the good things happening.
It seems logical, sure. Isn't it just basic emotional intelligence to build reciprocal relationships where everyone recognizes and appreciates the sacrifices being made? I mean, the author even anticipates this argument, doesn't he?
He absolutely does, and the way he dismantles it reveals the very core of his philosophy. He imagines an opponent saying exactly what you just said.
Wait, a rational man is bound to understand what he's doing.
Yeah. It's the property of a sociable person to be sensible that he is acting sociably, and to want the other person to be sensible of it too. It sounds incredibly reasonable to our modern ears.
It sounds like standard couples therapy, honestly. Acknowledge each other's efforts.
But the author dismisses this entirely.
Yeah.
He argues that if you think this way, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the true meaning of sociability.
How so?
You're allowing yourself to be led astray by what he calls a probable appearance of reason. True sociability isn't about mutual backpatting. It isn't about ensuring your ledger is balanced. It is about fulfilling your natural role so seamlessly, so instinctively, that it doesn't require conscious accounting. I mean, if the vine demanded the farmer acknowledge every single grape, the vineyard would just cease to function.
So the practical challenge for you listening today is incredibly difficult, but wonderfully simple at the same time.
Produce a good deed today.
Produce a good deed today. Do something helpful at work, or clean the kitchen at home, or solve a problem for a friend, and then instantly, deliberately forget it.
Do not log it in your mental ledger. Do not casually bring it up in conversation later.
Do not wait for a thank you. Just let it go, like a vine dropping a grape, and move on to the next moment.
It is a radical form of freedom, really, because you are no longer outsourcing your emotional stability to someone else's gratitude.
Okay, but let's ground this in harsh reality for a minute.
Always a good idea.
You get out of bed with cosmic purpose. You do a good deed and you drop it like a grape. But then you run into the actual inhabitants of the real world.
Ah, yes. Other people.
What happens when the people around you are just awful? What if they are ungrateful, annoying, aggressively rude, or they directly attack you?
It's easy to be a vine in an empty vineyard.
Exactly. It is much harder when people are actively trying to chop you down.
This is the ultimate stress test of the philosophy, and the text spends a massive amount of time on conflict resolution and emotional regulation in the face of difficult people.
Let's talk about Book 5, Section 22, because we find one of the most vivid, visceral, and frankly humorous analogies for dealing with difficult people.
The strategy of the offensive armpit.
It is so bizarre and perfect. He literally asks himself, "Be not angry neither with him whose breath, neither with him whose armholes are offensive."
He is literally saying, why on earth would you get furious at someone with terrible body odor?
What can he do? Such is his breath naturally, and such are his armholes, and from such an effect and such a smell must of necessity proceed.
It feels comical to us, but the psychological architecture underneath that statement is staggering. He's leaning heavily into a concept of behavioral determinism.
Behavioral determinism. Break that down.
In this worldview, people act based on their current understanding of what is good and bad. When someone is rude, selfish, or aggressive, it is because their moral perception is corrupted.
Their spiritual breath, so to speak, is foul.
Yes. So getting furiously angry at them for acting selfishly is as irrational and as pointless as screaming at someone for having bad breath. It is a necessary, unavoidable effect of their current internal condition.
Think about this the next time you encounter an anonymous internet troll in a comment section, or someone aggressively cuts you off in traffic.
We spend so much energy getting physically enraged by these people.
We do. But yelling at a troll for being toxic is like yelling at a dog for barking. It's just what they do. Their armpits smell.
Exactly.
But wait, does this mean we just passively tolerate toxic behavior? We just hold our breath and let them ruin the environment?
Not at all. And the distinction he makes next is crucial. The text advises, "Let thy reasonable faculty work upon his reasonable faculty, show him his fault, and admonish him."
So you don't ignore the behavior. You address it.
Right. But you do it rationally, calmly, and entirely stripped of the emotional charge of taking offense. If they listen to reason, You have cured them, and there was no need for anger in the first place.
And if they don't listen,
Then getting angry wouldn't have helped anyway.
he takes this emotional detachment even further in Book 6, Section 19, where he brings up the palestra.
The ancient wrestling school. The physical intensity of this metaphor perfectly captures the violence of daily human interaction.
Because it's brutal.
It is. He says, suppose you are at the palestra, engaged in a wrestling match. Your opponent gets overly aggressive, they scratch you with their nails, they headbutt you and break your skin.
You are legitimately wounded.
Yes.
Your natural reaction would be to stop the match, scream foul play, and accuse them of being a mortal enemy.
Exactly. But he points out that a good wrestler doesn't exclaim in outrage. A good wrestler doesn't suspect their opponent of a sinister plot.
They simply use what he calls friendly declination.
They dodge the blow, they protect themselves physically, but they don't let hatred enter their heart. They recognize that getting scratched is just an occupational hazard of stepping onto the wrestling mat.
And he urges us to keep that exact same disposition in every other part of our lives.
Yes. But, as you can imagine, this is deeply countercultural.
Modern culture is practically fueled by the opposite idea. We are actively trained to feel outrage,
Right. If someone slights us, we are encouraged to clap back.
to expose them, to hold grudges, to view every minor transgression as a deeply personal, malicious attack on our identity.
It's exhausting.
So the idea of taking a metaphorical broken head in a corporate meeting or in a family argument and just using friendly declination without holding on to the anger that feels almost impossible. We crave justice. We want them to know exactly how much they hurt us.
That craving for validation is precisely the obstacle this text is trying to dismantle. And we have to apply wisdom with discernment here because modern listeners often mistake this Stoic emotional regulation for becoming a doormat.
Right, which it isn't.
Not at all. The text absolutely does not mandate that you allow people to abuse you. Look closely at Book Signs, section 45. He clearly states that you should use your best endeavors to persuade people.
And if reason and justice lead you to take action, you must do what is right, regardless of who opposes you.
Exactly.
But what if they use force to stop you? What if the corrupt coworker gets the promotion or the toxic family member successfully manipulates the situation against you?
Then you pivot. He says if someone uses force to withstand you, you convert your virtuous inclination from one object to another.
Convert it how?
You convert your desire for outward worldly justice into contented equanimity and cheerful patience. You recognize that their hindrance is simply the universe handing you the raw material for a new virtue.
Oh, I see. You were trying to practice justice. Now you are being given the opportunity to practice patience.
Exactly. Because, as he lays out so clearly in Book 6, Section 5, the best kind of revenge is not to become like unto them.
The best kind of avenge is not to become like unto them. Man, that's powerful. If someone introduces cruelty, chaos, or deceit into your life, and your response is to become cruel, chaotic, or deceitful right back at them, you have lost.
You have allowed their corrupted nature to infect yours.
You have let them pull you down onto their wrestling mat, and you basically become the bad brat.
Exactly. And to maintain this level of armor where you can dodge blows without anger and ignore the stench of bad behavior without losing your own peace, it requires a fundamental rewiring of how we perceive reality.
Because you cannot achieve this emotional regulation if you are still desperately attached to the things that make you insecure in the first place.
Right, which brings us to the most aggressive cognitive reframing in the entire diary. Book 6, Section 11.
This is the ultimate cognitive behavioral therapy technique from the ancient world.
It really is. It is a systematic process of stripping the glamour, the prestige, and the perceived value away from the things we prize most.
The Greeks called this technique fantasia, right? Examining our impression.
Yeah. Yes, but he takes it to a ruthless extreme. He examines the status symbols that drive human greed and anxiety, and he breaks them down to their barest physical components.
Give us an example.
He tells himself to sit at a luxurious banquet and look at the food thinking, this is the carcass of a fish, this of a bird, and this of a hog.
Brutal.
And he looks at the famous Falernum wine. Now, this was the absolute peak of luxury, the most expensive vintage of his era, basically the equivalent of a modern billionaire's prized champagne.
And what does he call it?
He reduces it to the bare juice of an ordinary grape.
He just strips the prestige right out of the glass. And he does it with fashion, too, which is incredible given his position.
Yeah.
I mean, the majestic purple robe was the ultimate exclusive symbol of imperial power.
Right. Only the emperor and the highest elites could wear Tyrian purple.
Yet he describes his own uniform of absolute power as nothing more than sheep's hairs dyed with the blood of a shellfish.
The biological reality of the dye aside, the psychological utility of this exercise is the key. He writes, "Outward pomp and appearance is a great juggler."
A great juggler.
Yeah. When we allow ourselves to be beguiled by luxury, by the appearance of power, or by status symbols, our rationality is effectively hijacked. The juggler tricks us.
We become willing to compromise our morals, exploit others, or suffer crippling anxiety, all just to acquire a specific arrangement of sheep's hair in grape juice.
By penetrating through the cultural narrative of the object down to its bare, mundane material reality, he shatters the spell.
And he applies this exact same stripping technique to fame and reputation in Book 6, Section 15. He equates the praises of men, the pursuit of glory, to a clattering noise, or the clattering of so many tongues.
So when you are losing sleep over getting likes on a post, or desperate for a glowing performance review from a boss you don't even respect,
You are literally agonizing over the clattering of tongues.
that reframing is incredibly potent, but it usually provokes a very strong reaction from modern readers.
It certainly provokes one for me. I read this, and my immediate thought is, isn't this incredibly depressing?
How so?
Well, if I sit down at a beautiful anniversary dinner and reduce a masterfully crafted glass of wine to bare juice, and I look at a gorgeous piece of couture fashion and call it sheep hair, and I dismiss the genuine, heartfelt praise of my peers as just clattering tongues.
Yeah.
Doesn't this philosophy just suck all the color and joy out of life? Are we meant to live in a gray, clinical, joyless world where nothing is beautiful or special?
That is the most common and immediate critique of Stoic stripping techniques. But if you analyze the text closely, the goal is not the destruction of joy. The goal is the destruction of enslavement.
Enslavement to the object.
Exactly. When you imbue a physical object or a social status with ultimate value, you become its slave. You are terrified of losing it, and you are consumed by envy toward those who have more of it.
Ah, I see.
Look at the end of Book 6, Section 15. He explicitly warns that if you remain caught up in the pursuit of these external things, you will be envious, jealous, suspicious, and full of confusion.
You will develop a vain desire to please, which he mentions earlier in Book 5, Section 16. You'll spend your life contorting your character just to satisfy the juggler.
So, by looking at the purple robe and recognizing it as just sheep hair, you aren't saying the robe is inherently evil or that you can't wear it. You are saying, I do not need this to be whole.
Precisely. It frees you to respect your own mind above all else. It leaves you, as he writes, acceptable to yourself, tractable to your friends, and conformable to the universe.
You can still drink the fine wine and enjoy it, but if the wine is spilled or if you lose your wealth and can only afford water, you aren't existentially crushed.
Because it's just grape juice anyway.
Right.
You enjoy the world without being held hostage by it.
Okay, that makes deep logical sense. We strip away the illusions of wealth and fame. We realize the purple robe doesn't matter. But it is relatively easy to be philosophical about a fancy coat or a glass of wine.
Right. The true test of this worldview is when the obstacle isn't a desire for luxury, but the arrival of genuine, unavoidable pain.
Oh, absolutely.
We have to face sickness. We have to face misfortune. We have to face profound loss. How does this philosophy hold up when the pain is real and physical?
This is where we encounter the concept of radical acceptance, and the perspective shift in Book 5 is staggering.
Let's talk about the prescription of nature in Book 5, Section 8.
That analogy is wild. He compares the universe, the entirety of nature and fate, to a physician.
Stop me in my tracks.
He points out that if a respected doctor prescribes a harsh treatment for your health, maybe they tell you to ride a horse rigorously or take freezing cold baths or walk barefoot in the snow, you accept it.
Even if the cold bath is agonizing, you endure it willingly because you trust that the physician's prescription leads to your overall health.
He then maps that exact logic onto the events of our lives. He argues that the nature of the universe is the ultimate physician.
Therefore, if the universe prescribes unto a person sickness or blindness or the loss of a loved one or severe financial damage, we must accept these events with the exact same disposition we would accept the harsh prescriptions of a doctor.
But why? Why on earth would we accept blindness or tragedy as a cure?
Because of his underlying belief in the interconnectedness of fate.
He believed that whatever happens to an individual is ordained as something subordinate to the fates. fitting perfectly together like square stones in a grand pyramid, creating a universal harmony.
A localized pain is necessary for the health, welfare, and prosperous state of the universe as a whole. You are a single cell in a massive body. Sometimes the cell must suffer for the body to live.
And he takes this radical acceptance even further in Book 5, Section 17, introducing an idea that has become incredibly popular today.
The idea that the obstacle actually becomes the way.
Yes, he writes that the rational mind has the power to turn and convert any impediment whatsoever to be its actual aim and purpose.
The phrasing he uses is just magnificent. What before was the impediment is now the principal object of her working, and that which before was in her way is now her readiest way.
It is mental alchemy.
That's exactly what it is. Let's say your goal is to launch a new business, but you suddenly fall violently ill. The sickness is the impediment. It blocks your path.
A normal reaction is despair and frustration.
But the alchemical mind instantly pivots. It says, my goal is no longer to launch the business right now. My new immediate task is to bear this sickness with supreme grace, patience, and courage.
Suddenly, the sickness is no longer in your way. It is your way. It is the new raw material provided by the universe for you to practice virtue.
But this raises a massive vital concern for the modern listener, and I think we need to use some serious discernment here.
Let's do it.
If I just accept sickness or a terrible financial loss or even systemic injustice in my community as a prescription from the universe, doesn't that breed dangerous passivity?
It's a huge risk if misunderstood.
Right. Like if my city is corrupt, do I just accept it as the universe's cold bath? Should we not fight for cures to diseases? Should we not fight to change the world for the better?
It is a critical distinction to make because misinterpreting this leads to quietism, the idea that you just sit on a rock and let the world burn.
Which the author didn't do.
The author of this text was absolutely not a passive observer of life. He spent his reign commanding armies in brutal winters, trying to reform laws, managing grain supplies, and attempting to stabilize an empire on the brink of collapse.
The text repeatedly emphasizes the duty to care for the city and country, as he states in Book 6, Section 39. He was a man of relentless action.
So how does relentless action coexist with accepting terrible things as a prescription?
Because the acceptance he is advocating for is entirely internal.
Right. It is about your emotional posture toward reality at the exact moment it occurs. You accept the present reality without whining, without what he calls murmuring against the gods.
If you receive a terrible medical diagnosis, denying reality, wishing it weren't true, or raging against the unfairness of the universe drains the exact cognitive and emotional energy you need to seek treatment.
By accepting the prescription, internally acknowledging that this is what the universe has handed you today, you free up your rational mind to take the absolute best, most effective next step in the external world.
You fight the disease with every medical tool available, but you don't hate the universe for giving it to you.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It is the profound difference between a victim saying, why is this happening to me? And a rational agent saying, this has happened. What is my most virtuous next step?
Precisely. And this internal acceptance prepares us for the ultimate prescription of nature. The one condition we all must eventually face. The one disease that cannot be cured by external action.
Which is our own mortality.
Death. If there is one theme that permeates this diary, it is the constant, unflinching confrontation with death.
He does not shy away from it at all. He uses it as a daily, practical tool.
In Book 6, Section 42, he provides this overwhelming list of historical figures. It is a who's who of human achievement.
He lists brave orators, grave philosophers like Heraclitus, Pythagoras, and Socrates. He lists heroes of old times, brave captains, and kings.
And then brilliantly, he even lists the great scoffers and cynics, like Menippus, who spent their entire lives mocking the frailty and vanity of human life.
He groups the kings, the philosophers, and the mockers all together to make one undeniable point. They are all long since dead and gone. Their bones are in the same ground.
It's an incredible technique to force perspective. He's looking back across all traditions and types of people, proving that grappling with mortality is the universal human baseline.
But the imagery that hit me the hardest is in Book 6, Section 22. He writes a single, devastating sentence. Alexander of Macedon, and he that dressed his mules, when once dead, both came to one.
Alexander the Great, the man who conquered the known world, who believed he was the son of a god, and the nameless laborer who fed his donkeys.
In the ground, nature makes zero distinction between them.
And he strips his own identity down even further in Book 5, Section 27. He reminds himself, the most powerful man alive, that within a very little while he will be either ashes or a skeleton.
And a name.
Or perchance, not even a name, just an empty sound, a rebounding echo.
We have to ask why a man would repeatedly subject himself to such bleak imagery. For a modern listener, visualizing yourself as a skeleton or a rebounding echo sounds incredibly morbid, perhaps even paralyzing.
What is the practical utility of focusing on your own cosmic irrelevance?
When I first read it, it felt like staring into an abyss. But when you tie it back to his earlier thoughts, it isn't an abyss at all. It is a tool for immense relief.
Relief.
Look at his conclusion in Book 5, Section 19. He contemplates the vastness of past and future time, the perpetual flux and change of all things in the universe. And then, looking at that infinite timeline, he asks himself a crucial question.
Art not thou then a very fool, who for these things are either puffed up with pride or distracted with cares?
It is the ultimate sizing tool. Mortality right-sizes our daily anxieties.
If Alexander the Great and his mule driver are just identical piles of ashes, why are you losing your mind with anxiety over performance review?
If both you and the person who insulted you online will soon be nothing but empty sounds, why are you holding on to that bitter grudge?
So here's a practical question for you listening to carry with you today. If you truly, deeply internalized that both you and your biggest rival at work, or that person who aggressively cut you off in traffic this morning, will soon be just an empty sound,
how would that change the email you're about to draft?
how would it change the temperature of the argument you're having with your spouse right now?
When you zoom out to the scale of skeletons and rebounding echoes, the petty grievances, the desperately guarded ledgers of good deeds, the desire for the clattering of tongues, they all just evaporate.
The awareness of death gives you the emotional space to do what he concludes you should do with your brief time: to worship the gods, to do good unto men, and to bear with them. It clears the fog.
But we have to acknowledge a very harsh reality here.
Let's hear it.
Facing all of this, getting out of bed with cosmic purpose, doing good without keeping a ledger, dodging the blows of difficult people, stripping away the illusions of luxury, radically accepting sickness, and constantly facing your own death, it is exhausting.
Yeah, it requires a level of superhuman vigilance that most of us simply do not possess on a daily basis.
It is an impossible standard to maintain flawlessly, and the author knew that better than anyone. We are going to fail. We are going to hit the snooze button. We are going to yell at the troll. We are going to covet the purple robe, and we are going to murmur against our bad luck.
Which brings us to the final, and in my opinion, the most beautiful and compassionate aspect of this entire text: how we handle our own inevitable failure.
In Book 5, Section 9, he directly addresses the feeling of failing to live up to our own ideals.
He tells himself, be not discontented, be not disheartened, be not out of hope, if often it succeed not so well with thee, punctually and precisely to do all things according to the right dogmata.
He fully acknowledges his own hypocrisy and weakness, but he provides a specific protocol for what to do when you fall off the path. He says, when you are cast off, return to your principles again.
And the way he frames that return is everything. He uses a medical analogy that dictates exactly how we should return to our philosophy after we fail.
He says, do not return to your principles like a schoolboy returning to a strict schoolmaster or pedagogue.
That is such a vital distinction. When we fail at a diet or lose our temper, our immediate instinct is to use our philosophy or our goals as a stick to beat ourselves with.
We use guilt as a motivator. We berate ourselves. But he rejects that approach entirely.
He says to return to your principles, as they that have sore eyes to their sponge and egg, or as another to his cataplasm.
A cataplasm is an ancient soothing poultice or a healing plaster.
This completely rewires the concept of self-improvement. When you lose your temper with a coworker, or you fall back into despair over a financial loss, the goal isn't to flagellate yourself with guilt.
Your wisdom, your core principle, should be a place of refuge. You apply your philosophy like a soothing sponge to a sore, irritated eye. You apply it to clear your vision, to heal the irritation of the ego, so you can see reality clearly again.
It is an act of self-compassion, not self-punishment.
And to help him apply that soothing sponge, to give himself a concrete anchor when his own mind was too tired to process abstract philosophy, he relied on a specific role model.
In Book 6, Section 28, he explicitly tells himself to do all things as becomes the disciple of Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father and the previous emperor.
The level of specific detail he lists here is remarkable. He doesn't just vaguely say, be a good emperor like my father. He lists the exact traits he needs to emulate in moments of crisis.
He recalls Antoninus Pius's equability, his cheerfulness, his spare diet.
He remembers how his father would never give ear to slanders and false accusations, how he would examine things meticulously, how he wasn't easily frightened or suspicious, and how he never rushed into a decision.
He even notes the incredibly mundane detail that Antoninus could work from morning to evening without needing to use the restroom outside of his accustomed hours because of his incredibly disciplined diet.
But that hyper-specific detail serves a crucial psychological purpose. When the pressures of the court are crushing you and abstract principles like accept fate or be sociable feel too airy or distant to hold on to, having a specific, concrete role model is a lifeline.
You need someone whose behaviors you can vividly, physically picture.
When he was confused, angry, or exhausted, he didn't have to formulate a perfect philosophical argument. He just had to ask, what would Antoninus Pius do in this exact room right now?
We all need that specific anchor. For you listening, maybe it's a grandparent who possessed incredible grace, a mentor who navigated corporate chaos with integrity, or historical figure whose biography you know inside and out.
You need someone whose specific character acts as a blueprint when your own judgment gets clouded by the storm.
And as we step back and view all of these entries together, from the agonizing struggle to get out of bed to the confrontation with an eternity of silence, it all points toward a unified, profoundly resilient vision of a human being.
It is a man desperately trying to play his small part in a massive, interconnected whole, using every cognitive tool available to maintain his humanity.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to carry into your day. Consider the idea buried in Book 6, Section 37.
The author reflects on a thought from the older philosopher Heraclitus, noting that absolutely everyone is cooperating to build the world.
Even those who sleep. Even those who murmur, complain, and actively resist their fate.
The universe, the grand physician, uses all of us to build the structure of reality.
So tomorrow, when you face a deeply frustrating situation or an impossible toxic person, ask yourself, how is this exact moment and this exact person precisely what I need right now to practice my own character?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.